So welcome Jack Kornfield, Sylvia Wetzel, and Norman Fischer to the Garrison Institute. So you're here for a very significant and not very frequent gathering of Western Buddhist teachers from all the traditions. The last one happened about 10 years ago. We have pioneer teachers, folks such as you, who have been in the forefront of bringing the Dharma to the West for many decades now, and we have what we're calling the next gen teachers here, who are the people who are going to be picking up the baton from you, who are already in the process of doing that. The people who will be looking at this are practitioners, people who are interested in contemplative practice, people interested in Buddhism, people interested in the Garrison Institute. What do you have to say to them about this gathering? What are your hopes for it? What will they see as a result of it? What will it mean to those of us out here who are practitioners of you all? Any of you?
Well, the first thing everybody said when we met is, this is a meeting about deepening friendships. Most of us know each other quite some time. Some have met first time, but it's about connecting. We work in different fields, in different traditions, with different approaches, with different audiences, but to meet and to see how we all belong together to this big, big mandala of Buddhism in the West is something very, very inspiring.
And there are some teachers who work quite a bit in community and have many colleagues, but there are others who get actually quite isolated and are separate from others. So to be able to come together in friendship, to learn from one another, to support one another, has been important. And it starts to undermine a tendency toward sectarianism, which happened in Asia. If you go to Buddhist Asia of Thailand or Burma or Tibet or Japan, there is sectarianism. And one of the things that's happening here in the US and Europe is, Canada, is that there's a melding of traditions, not losing the depth of them, but learning from one another, a collegiality, a mutual respect that we hope is making a foundation for that kind of well-being and respect to go for generations ahead. And one of the other interesting things is that many of the teachers who are here have studied, to a certain extent, in lineages other than their own, which is a whole new phenomenon in America. It's not that they might not be dedicated to their Zen or their Theravada or their practice, but somehow they also learn from other traditions and teachers, and it actually feels very healthy. So the meeting itself is an expression of that whole new way, a more integrated way of the mandala, as Sylvia said, of Dharma, and learning from one another.
I should say Jack is from the Theravada tradition, Sylvia from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and Norman from the Zen tradition. So the three main traditions represented here.
And we're sitting on the same bench.
There you go. Now I want to follow up on what you just said, Jack. You said this is a new phenomenon, a new Western phenomenon, that people are crossing traditions. Teachers and students are crossing traditions, and you're seeing that as an enrichment and as a move away from the potential for sectarianism, which has existed, as you say, in Asia and also exists in many other religions. Westerners and Americans in particular are notorious dabblers, and where do you draw that balance about enriching versus, well, I've done that, now I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and it's sort of like the attention deficit disorder approach to contemplative practice?
I'm not worried. For one thing, this can't be prevented. And for another thing, so why worry? But another thing is that if you are teaching and you preserve some depth and some seriousness in your teaching, people will dabble up to a point, and at some point they'll go beyond that, or not. And so I think there's a kind of inevitable attrition. In other words, many people will come and access many things, and one doesn't want to cut off that access. And then doing that for a certain amount of time, people will necessarily go deeper, or they'll factor off. And even the people who factor off, I'm sure, have been affected in some way by what they've done. And for the people who will go further, I think what's interesting is they may go further actually perhaps in a number of different traditions. So for me, religious practice as a general category is a very powerful thing that human beings have always had and now more than ever really need. And as long as you kind of define it as a belief system that it's exclusive of other belief systems, whether it's within Buddhism or beyond Buddhism, you misunderstand it in some fundamental way. So I think it's really good to offer it widely and broadly and not sort of say, wag a finger and say, well, you know, you're just a dabbler. No, let's offer it and let's let people go as far as they need to go and can go, and let's make sure that the people who are offering it understand what depth is and communicate it in everything they do. Even if it's just a big public gathering where anybody shows up, there should be some depth of expression and understanding evidenced. So as long as we do that, I think we'll be okay.
And that quality of trust that Norman started with, I've seen so much over the years. I was flying through the Miami airport, traveling around as I do to a lot of retreats, a few years ago, and this guy walked up to me and introduced. He said, "Jack, is that you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Remember me? I sat a retreat with you in '78 at IMS in Barrie."
Right.
He said, "And I haven't been that much of a student since then. I got a lot of things from that retreat, but then I went about my life. But this last year, I had a heart attack, and I had to have surgery. I was being wheeled into the operating room, and all of my practice came back. It was all there. I knew how to center myself with my breath. I knew how to be present and compassionate with what was happening." He said, "When it came down to it, I want to thank you because that has made the difference now 30 years later." And I really trust that, as Norman says.
Wonderful.
There's some way in which there's something that we know really deeply in ourselves already.
Right.
It's not like the Dharma is being put into people, you know, from somebody else. There is a fundamental wisdom. My teacher called it the one who knows in us. And we're resonating with that and awakening it in people. So I have a tremendous trust of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a great...
I would follow that and put maybe another aspect in. You see, most of the people who come to our retreats are raised in the Christian or Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yes.
So for them to see that we work together with others, or that I have had Zen teachers, I had a Theravada teacher, I had different Tibetan teachers, to hear that, to know that, makes it easier for them to respect the traditions they come from, because they see a diversity in me, they see a diversity in the different teachers who cooperate for sometimes bigger events. So it helps them to integrate their own approach where they came from and not have this exclusivity attitude. I have to abandon my past and have to tread the Buddhist path, and this is the new thing and the real thing. So that's very helpful for them.
Mm-hmm. I've been impressed with the diversity that you all have gathered here, except in one mode. I've been impressed with diversity of age, of experience, of gender, of race. But the Tibetan Rinpoches are noticeable by their absence. We have one coming, I believe. And Sylvia, maybe this is to you first. What do you make of that? Does that mean anything?
I mean, you see, the Tibetans were thrown from the Middle Ages to the 20th century 60 years ago. So for them to make the transition into a democratic society where you are not rely on nobility and on your old tradition and on your status and rituals, it's a big thing for them. So there are some younger ones who really respect Western teachers and treat them as colleagues, but to come to a gathering and just be a nobody is
like
somebody
like us.
like us.
Far right now.
It's like if you meet nobility, people from nobility with workers and housewives, and just to behave in a normal way, just on the airport, to the people from the first class and the business class meeting with the charter people, this is for us difficult.
Yes.
So for them it's an incredible big step,
Yes.
but it will come.
So it's a generational change that is in the works, perhaps.
A generational and a cultural change,
Yes.
from the Middle Ages to the 20th century.
Yes.
It took us 3 centuries
Yes.
in Europe and America to kind of deal with that.
Mhm.
So
We invited the new young Karmapa to come to this meeting, and he was interested. And part of the invitation was to say, you could come without your bodyguards and handlers and all of that around you if you wanted, and actually be in the room with a number of people your own age and hear what's happening in the West, where you will become and already are an important teacher from the Western teachers. And he, as a very young Tibetan teacher, he was quite interested in that, but he was unable to get out of India. So that kind of openness is coming.
yeah.
Good. Okay. How about a practice question or two? So, what about enlightenment? Is that real? Is it really real? Is that the goal? Have you seen it? Do you teach it? Do people practice for it? Or is it really becoming, in the Western context, a metaphor for kind of continuous improvement?
It's absolutely real. It's as real as anything. I mean, the possibility of freedom, which the Buddha awakened to under the Bodhi tree, is every human being's birthright, and it comes in different forms. But when Nelson Mandela walks out of 27 years of Robben Island prison with such magnanimity and dignity and graciousness, and yes, he went through all of his difficulties if you read his story, but it shows that everything can be taken from you but that fundamental freedom of spirit. And that's true for everybody. And there are different ways that we touch it. We touch it in deep meditation, when the small sense of self and personality drops away or dissolves or becomes put in perspective of the vastness of creativity and emptiness and form. But we touch it in all kinds of ways. And so it's not like it's there in the Himalayas. And my teacher, Ajahn Buddhadasa, one of the great masters of the forest tradition of Thailand, said, why aren't we grateful for everyday nirvana? It's the same nirvana, and in a way we're inviting people to understand that liberation is here for them now. It's not a fiction, and it's not someplace else.
Yeah, I think the question already implies what I think a lot of people feel who are not practitioners and not familiar with it would feel, which is enlightenment is like a little bit like either a drug that you take that afterward you're cured and everything's different, or a little switch in the brain that once you flip it, after that the entire world is different, you know. And it's a very kind of, in a way, mechanistic understanding of what it means to be a human being. So I completely agree with Jack. Of course, liberation, awakening to the power and beauty of being alive is real and possible and an inherent human birthright. And yes, there are experiences where we see that all of a sudden and we appreciate it. But it's pretty clear that those experiences need to be built on. There needs to be a culture. There needs to be an ongoing cultivation of the heart. So, you know, it's like any religion. Your religious life doesn't end at a certain point, and that's the end of it. It goes on and on and on. So there's no end. It's not exactly, you use the word improvement, it's not exactly improvement in the sense of character development in the ordinary sense, but the appreciation, the gratitude, the kind of sense of wonder and awe about, you know, how fantastic, tragic, and beautiful it is to be alive. There's no end to that. It just goes on and on and on. So I think awakening, enlightenment is the most real thing, but not in this mechanistic, simple-minded way. I mean, I think we have to hold it in a much bigger scope. So it's maybe people who are looking for that and they think they can get that done with in a couple of retreats. You know, should probably think again. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like this. There's the word like discover. I like words very much. They show you we discover enlightenment. So it means it's covered. It's all there. Mm-hmm. The ability to see, to understand, to feel connected, to feel one with whatever it is there. But it's covered by opinions and emotional patterns and habits. And through sitting, through meditation practice, through mindfulness practice, through devotion, you notice how you cover this incredible potential within yourself and in interaction even within others. And so you have this so-called enlightenment experiences when the lid for a moment opens, or you become for moments transparent for this incredible wisdom which is there already. And for me, I would say a couple of these enlightenment moments or insights in your true nature can help you to develop this strong confidence that it's there all the time.
It's really encouraging.
And this is for me the ripening process. So the process is open-ended. That's clear. You can't say at number 10 you got it, but it's your confidence gets greater. And it's not that you always are in this enlightenment experience state or something like that, but you have this confidence that you can deal with your humanness and the humanness of others, and that everybody has this basic intelligence which can shine forth.
And if you do think you have it perfect, all you have to do is go home to your family.
Yes.
And that sort of helps clarify that. If you note, even Jesus and Buddha, when they went back to their family, didn't have an easy time.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I hear all three of you saying that it's an everyday, already present experience that, as you say, Sylvia, is uncovered through practice, as opposed to something that is attained, or as Jack, as you said, after enlightenment, the laundry. Your book of many years ago. How about non-self? Do you think Westerners can really grasp teaching on non-self? You know, how do you define it? How do you experience it? How do you help people arrive at that, especially in a culture, a Western culture, that is centrally built around therapy? You know, we spend years in therapy, in a sense, strengthening the self. And you know, where do you go with that?
You know, there's a moment, since I've also worked as a psychologist and therapist, there's a moment in therapy where people get tired of their story. They've like told it so many times and say, you know, but I really told this story. And that's a really important moment, because it's the moment when they realize that they're not limited to their biography, and they're not limited to their story. We have a personal life, we have a biography, we have a, you know, racial lineage and a cultural lineage and so forth. Those are different dimensions of self. But to claim and say, this is who I am, it turns out is wrong. And the more attachment and solidity one makes around self, the more suffering there is. Buddhadasa used to talk about, let's first move to non-selfishness. So there isn't, which I thought was a brilliant, simple translation.
Very good.
Or non-self-centeredness in some way. And any American gets that. And then when you start to realize, well, non-selfishness and non-self-centeredness, how much ease and space that gives, that's really the gateway to realize that it's not about possession, but it's about being interdependent with all things, that there isn't really a separate self. And that realization then comes more naturally.
Yeah, it's interesting that people, we get fixated on the terminology, because in Zen, that same thing is described as true self. You know, so not self. In Zen, Zen typically doesn't use the terminology of not self or non-self or letting go of self, but rather true self, in just the same way that you described. So true self is the self that you most truly are, which is expressed through your personality, through your personal life, through your biography, but it's something much larger that's expressed through that. So when you are limited to your story and your biography and the narrowness of your sort of self-centeredness, which is quite natural to all of us, then there's a lot of pain in that. And when you see that all of that limitation is actually the only way that true self can be expressed in a human life, then you appreciate your biography and all your crazinesses and all your limitations and all your stupidities in a very different way. And then you're no longer exercising them with such desperation in the way that you did before. And instead you're kind of taking joy in them. And when you take joy in them, they're not hurting you anymore. And they're not hurting other people. So, you know how limited you are, and you know what your story is, and you know what kind of a person you're born to be in this lifetime. But it's no longer something you're chafing against. It's something that you're making use of for friendship and love. So it's very different.
I appreciate very much the two approaches you gave. Another approach, which I use that too, is I ask people, remember a moment when you were very happy. And just when you were very happy. And they give a situation. I was dancing, I was singing, I was being grateful, I was being in a deep discussion with somebody, I was alone. And I said, and with what did you identify then? And the people said, oh, there was no point in identifying with anything. I was just communicating. I was just singing. I was just dancing. And so they get a feel that they have these non-self experiences in ordinary life all the time, whenever they feel together, integrated, connected, present. And from that on, I help them to discover when they identify strongly with a status, social status, with certain emotions, with certain opinions, then they don't feel happy. But when they are happy, it's because they don't identify. And so we go through situations again and again, and they learn to confide, to have confidence in this deeper wisdom which shines through when they are present.
Thank you.
There was a moment some years ago when somebody asked Ram Dass how he related to the Jewish tradition that in which he grew up. He was bar mitzvahed as I was. I grew up in the Reform Jewish tradition, and now he was a Hindu, and did he have any respect for his Jewish tradition? And he said, of course I do, as I do, and there's the Hasidic and the Kabbalistic tradition, all the mystical Jewish things, and it's very beautiful, he said, and I have a great respect for it. He said, but remember, I'm only Jewish on my parents' side. and he's very witty in his way, but also there was a kind of profound wisdom in that, because we are Jewish or Catholic or Muslim or whatever it happens to be by birth, and those things need to be honored, as Norman says, but they don't completely define us. Who are we really as something more mysterious and deeper and freer than that.
So this conference happens about once every 10 years. That's been the pattern so far. Given how life is, it could be that one or more of you are not going to be at the next one. What would be your message to the teachers who gather at that next one?
Have a good time. And I'm saying that flippantly, because when death is right there, it's such a mysterious, huge thing. So then a little bit of humor comes up because I don't quite know how to deal with that, because it's such an amazing, mysterious thing that we who think we're here in some way are not going to be here in this way. It's extraordinary. But there's something sincere about it too. There's a sweetness that's come from the collegiality and the sense of Sangha and the interconnectedness and the maturing. I think it was Joseph said, we've really matured from the early years in a way that it feels like, something that has deepened in its flavorfulness and it's ripened in some way, and so we're good with one another. In early years, there were bigger egos in the room and more positionality and more desperation or need for admiration or judgment, or the things that we all have as humans. But there's a way in which you can actually see the practice worked and the Dharma worked, because people were deep and very honest and genuine, but also very loving. And so when I say have a good time, I mean it in a deep way.
I would just tell them, do what we did. Share. Meet, share, talk about your deepest problems, talk about your longings, your vision, your good experiences, your difficult experiences. Share, spend time together, go out, go for a walk and meditate together. And then you see the richness that each person has a different approach to Buddhism, is touched by different methods or teachings or meditations or images or metaphors. And if we share, if we meet, if we communicate, we see the richness of the whole.
A friend of mine wrote a wonderful novel about several generations of his family. And the name of the novel was The Life That Ran Through Me. And he died, and it says that on his gravestone. the life that ran through me.
Mm-hmm.
So life is running through us, and it runs on through us. It goes through us, and it goes on. And we're alive now, and then when we are gone, life isn't gone. Life keeps going, and it'll run through us in this generation, it'll run through the next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. And so we take our places in that long line. And I think that if you come together in this way for this kind of historic occasion where you remember your generation as we have remembered ours and experienced it together, you realize it's about that life that runs through you, and it keeps on running. So in a certain way, as long as that life keeps on running, we will in fact be at every meeting. So we'll be at the next
Wonderful.
one too, no matter what.
Jack, Sylvia, Norman, thank you for being here, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your questions and your love.